In today's show, I'm going to tell you why Topaz AI is out of my workflow and what's replacing it. Hey everyone, welcome into Magnolia Photography SC. I'm Jeff House, and I am a wildlife photographer in Charleston, South Carolina. And so today, as you all know from previous videos, because I've talked about it quite a bit, probably sick and tired of hearing about it, but I've talked a lot about Topaz Photo AI, and this has been my choice of noise reduction software and sharpening now in my wildlife photography for a few years, because I really think that Topaz AI has had one of, if not the best products out there. It does a great job at reducing those photos with high ISO noise, reduces that noise, and it does a great job of sharpening and bringing detail back into your images. But all good things must come to an end. And I think that I'm pretty set on making a change to another software. And I've been using it and I've been testing it, and I wanted to share this program with you today, and I wanted to share some of the results. And I want to take a look at some photos that were processed using this program and compare those to the photos that were also run through Topaz Photo AI. And I want to show you some of the differences that I'm seeing with my photos in my workflow. So the new program that I am using right now, and we've talked about this program before, but this one's a little bit different, but it's a program by DxO. And in a previous video, we took a look at the full editing program by DxO. It's called Photolab DxO 8. And we talked about, hey, is this program good enough to replace Lightroom Classic? And I really do love their program. I think it is a tremendous program, but what it comes down to for me, and I've showed you this in previous videos as well several times, I just can't get away from the masking that Lightroom provides, right? We talk about being able to mask the background of our image, and we can do local edits to just the background, and then we can select our subject. And we can isolate our subject and make local adjustments to just the subject. And we can really create a lot of depth, texture, and dimension in our images because of how we can manipulate and control the different aspects of our photos. Now, DxO 8 does have masking, but it's not AI masking, which means you can achieve the same results. It just takes a little bit more effort. It takes a little bit more work. So for me right now, I think DxO 8 overall compared to Lightroom is a better program. I believe you get better results. I just think that you have to work a little bit harder when you look at the whole program in its entirety to get those better results. Now, that may be worth it to you. For me, I'm pumping out a lot of images, and so I want to balance that quality with that time issue, right? And those are all things that we have to consider when we're going through our editing workflow. But I want to take a look at DxO today, but I want to look at their PureRAW 4 program, their software for PureRAW 4. And what this is simply their noise reduction software. Now, DxO is known for having one of the top quality noise reduction software in the industry. There's no doubt about it. And it just keeps getting better and better and better. But I recently decided, you know what, I'm going to take a look at this. It's not the full DxO 8 program, as I keep mentioning, but it is their scaled down, noise reduction and their sharpening program. What are some of the benefits and why would I consider DxO? Well, one, if you look at the noise reduction, I'm starting to notice a few things with Topaz AI that I didn't really notice until I compared it to the DxO program. So we're going to talk about that as we look at some comparison photos. The other thing that I think is pretty essential to the DxO program is that the lens corrections, the sharpening, they are actually building their lens correction models around the specific lens you are using, right? Topaz, Lightroom Classic, they do, I think, more of, I don't want to say cookie cutter, but I'm going to use that expression right now because nothing else is coming to mind. But all in all, I guess the whole point of it is that the other programs aren't drilling down as deep as DxO is. DxO is actually diving into your lens deeper and really looking at what is happening with that lens, right? From a technical standpoint, and they're building that into their software to make the corrections for where that lens falls short. And every camera lens falls short in some regard. So that is huge, right? Because it makes the correction a little bit more personalized, a little bit more tailored towards the equipment that you're using. And that's very beneficial. All right. So with that being said, I also want to point out that DxO PureRAW 4 can be used as a standalone program, or it can be used with Lightroom Classic as a plugin. Now, of course, I am still using Lightroom Classic, so I am using it as a plugin because that just makes the whole process very seamless. So hopefully that all makes sense to you. If it doesn't, let me know in the comments below, and I can give you any further explanation you might need. With that being said, though, let's jump in now. I want to show you how DxO Pure 4 works and how simple it really is and how quick it really is as well. Okay, guys, welcome into Lightroom Classic here. I'm actually going to take a raw photo. I actually captured this morning. We can see that I took this at 8:28 this morning. So I was out at about 6:45 walking around, and I finally came across this belted kingfisher that was over a very large creek that's in the back of near where I live, and so provided some good photos. But let's take a look at some of the information here that I have on this photo. If we take a look at this right up here in the top left corner, right, we can see that this was taken at a shutter speed of 1/16,000th of a second. And I was using an aperture of f6.3 because I was at 600 millimeters. And when you're using this Sony 200 to 600 variable aperture lens, when you're at the 600 millimeters, the fastest aperture is 6.3. Then the ISO, which is really what we're interested in for the purposes of this discussion today and our noise reduction, is at 12,800. So you can see that that ISO is pretty elevated. Now, rule of thumb is always shoot at the lowest ISO that you possibly can while still being able to maintain an appropriate shutter speed so that you can do whatever you want to do creatively, right? If we're talking about freezing action, though, we know that we need to work with those higher ISOs so we can keep that shutter speed up in those conditions where the light is a little bit less than optimal. So at 12,800, what we're going to do is we're going to first take this photo and we're going to run it through DxO PureRAW 4. So I do that by just highlighting the photo here, which is right down there. And then we're going to come up here to the file and we're going to go to the plugin extras. And as we come over, you can see that we have two options here. We can preview and process with DxO, or we can process instantly. From everything I've seen with this program, it is recommended that you do a preview and process. I honestly can't tell you the exact reasoning behind that, but that is the preferred method of using it. So that's what I do. I'm happy with the results. That's what I'm going to stick with. So if we click on that, it's going to take just a quick second here. Might be a little bit lagging again because we're running the screen recording software. But what it does is it brings us in right here to DxO PureRAW 4. And what we have here is a little slider that we can click, right? This is the original image. And then this is what's happening with the noise reduction and the lens correction sharpening effects applied. So pretty cool. And then what we can do is we can come down here to the bottom, and there's a couple different things we can do. So we can change, like how close we are, right? If we want to click on the 1-to-1, or we can go to, that'll bring it in a little closer. We can go 2-to-1, right? We can click this little arrow, and you can see that we can keep on going here and really, really zoom in. So these are all things that we can do, and this will just allow us to get a little bit closer to see what's happening with the noise. And if we take the original photo back here, look at the difference in the noise reduction and the sharpening, right? So we see this as it unfolds, and man, that is wonderful. And you can hopefully see this through the video. I know we're working on a light blue background here with the sky, but there's a lot of grain to the left of that center line here that I'm moving. And if I bring it over a little bit more towards the head, you can start to see that. And you can see like the color fringing going on there, right? On the head of the belted kingfisher there. And then when we go back, you can see that's all removed. We got a lot of detail there, and the noise is really, really cleaned up. So that's really nice. And then if we click this little arrow, double arrow, it'll bring us back there. Haven't used this, so this is preview not updated. Okay. So again, this is what we're doing. These just allow you really to change how you want to view your image. You can zoom in or zoom out depending on the level of detail you're looking to do. Now, when you come over here to the right panel, the first thing that you see is that we have processing and denoising. And essentially what we have is we have the different denoising templates, programs, whatever you want to call it, that DxO has had over the years. Deep Prime XD2/XD. This is the latest and greatest version of their noise reduction software. What I can tell you is I'm not sure why they include all of their previous models for this. I always use this. This is what I would recommend you use. I've looked at different photos using the different programs that they have in here. This is by far the best. And again, it's the latest and greatest with all the latest updates. So there's really no reason not to just leave this checked. The other thing you can do, if you look, is you can go to the advanced button and you can change the effect of the noise reduction by changing the luminance and the detail level. So essentially what's happening, right, is the pixels get smoothed out when you're applying the noise reduction. And so you can take the force details and use that to bring some of the detail back in. I do recommend that you use these sliders with caution because it's very easy to overdo them. So if we do our 2-to-1 zoom in here, and we just kind of bring this over where we can kind of see that, if we start to change this, you can see as we go to the left, it's going to bring more noise in on the image to the right. But if we go to the right, it's going to reduce that noise. And so I find that the standard here that is offered inside of PureRAW 4 tends to work very, very well. I really don't tweak these too much. If I was going to tweak one over the other, it would be the luminance slider. I think the detail one, you got to be a little bit careful because it gets real easy when you start using things like this to make your image look over sharpened or fake. And so you got to be real cautious with those types of things. So it does provide you just a couple of sliders that, again, you can tweak to your liking. But again, I can't stress enough, proceed with caution when doing so. Now, when we come down to the optical corrections, we have a little drop down here, right? Right now it's set to hard. I would typically keep this at soft. I think that seems to work best in most cases. Now, if you have an image that is real soft, then you might want to go to the standard or strong. I have never used hard, which I think is just a little too much. But if you go to the standard, we can kind of see what it does here. And I'm not seeing too huge of a difference here, but if you go to the soft and it just reduces that a little bit, I might go with the standard with this photo. If you remember when we were looking at this in Lightroom Classic, this shot was taken from a little bit of a distance. I was standing on a pier and I could only get so close to the belted kingfisher here. And I had to photograph him where he was hovering over the creek right here as he was getting ready to dive bomb to get a fish. So I had to kind of deal with what I was dealt, right? So I had to deal with that distance. And so that distance, you start to get that atmospheric conditions that are in the air, right? That little bit of haze, those little things, and that can soften your image a little bit more than if you, of course, were closer to your subject. So because of that, I'm going to go with the standard. I think I'm going to like that a little bit better based on what I'm seeing here. So you can just change that through the drop down. It's also going to fix the vignetting, right? Every lens tends to have a little bit of darkening in the corners, a little bit of, darkening down, it's kind of an effect we like to add to our photos. I know some photographers won't bother fixing that because they're like, well, I'm just going to add a vignette later on in the editing process anyway. So not a big deal. I like to remove it. I don't necessarily like how the camera does it. And if I leave the vignetting there and then I add a vignette later, then I feel like I'm kind of double dipping with the vignette. So I'm not a big fan of that. I just like to remove it, be done with it. Chromatic aberration, right? This is where we start to get that green and purple fringing along the edges of certain areas of a photo. And every lens tends to have some sort of chromatic aberration. And obviously, cheaper lenses will be worse in that regard. Better lenses tend to have much less of that. But this will basically remove that fringing. This is something that you can also do in Lightroom Classic. And I know I've seen photographers that will talk about this and say they don't like to use it in PureRAW 4. They'll use it in Lightroom. It's all preference. I use it here in PureRAW, and I'm not seeing any issues with chromatic aberration. So I think it does a good job. Lens distortion, and it's gonna fix that lens distortion. That's kind of what I was talking about earlier, where DxO does such a good job of fixing the lens distortion based on your actual lens. They actually build this into their program. And again, I think it dives deeper down into your specific lens, and it's a more tailored, personalized fix than a lot of the other software out there that kind of just does a overall lens correction type of maneuver in the editing process. Then the output format, you of course can choose from DNG, a TIFF, or a JPEG. We've talked about this before in previous editing shows that I've done, right? JPEG, of course, is the smallest image, but I want to retain editing when I go back into Lightroom Classic. If you recall, we have not done any editing to this picture. We're taking the raw image from Lightroom Classic and we're bringing it in to DxO PureRAW 4. And so if we were to send it back as a JPEG, what we are going to do is we are going to strip a lot of the data, the information from our photo, and it's going to limit how much we can manipulate the photo when we get it back into Lightroom Classic. So we don't want to do that. We want creative control. We don't want to give that up. We could use the TIFF image, which would strip some of the information from the photo, but it would still retain some data there that would allow us to manipulate the photo. But the problem with TIFF images, and the reason I don't like to work with them, is they are extremely large files. And so if you bring that TIFF image back into Lightroom, now you're just dealing with a larger image. Things may run a little bit slower in the editing process. And of course, it eats up hard drive space. So I don't really like to work with TIFFs personally. I am going to keep the DNG image, right? This is a version of a raw file with some of the data stripped down. And so the image is a little bit compressed. Now, I say a little bit because we still retain a lot of the creative control. We're still going to have a lot of flexibility to edit this image and tweak it to our specific liking. So DNG is my choice of file. Now, for the destination, I just keep the original images in the folder. Don't need to check anything else here unless you're exporting it out, which the way I do my workflow, working as a plugin, I just wanted to go back into Lightroom Classic, so I don't need to mess with this. File naming, you have different things here with file naming. I personally like to do the file name with the processing method, because when I get back into Lightroom, right, we know that if we hit the I key on our keyboard in Lightroom, we're going to get the information of the photo in that upper left-hand corner. We were just looking at that before we came into DxO PureRAW 4. Tells us our ISO, tells us our camera settings, and it tells us our file type. Well, by putting this with the processing method, if you go back into Lightroom and you're like, and maybe you have to step away from your computer for a second, you come back and you're like, oh, wait a minute, which one is the DxO image that I processed the noise reduction on, and which one is the original RAW file? If you hit I, this will just say deep prime DNG, in the file name, so I can quickly tell, oh yeah, that's the image that I processed. I also know that when PureRAW does the image processing and returns it back to Lightroom, it'll place it just to the right of your original file format. But if you should forget that, again, it's important to understand that you can have that name changed. So that's a real easy way to confirm you're on the right image. Okay, so now that we have the file naming done, now we can do the export. You can select the software here. I just do Adobe Lightroom Classic, or I can just leave it as select software. You don't have to put anything in there. And then this is something you can't change. It's the Lightroom collection import. So what happens is when we hit the process now, it's going to process the image based on everything that we've chosen. It's going to do the final noise reduction, the final lens corrections. All that will be processed and baked into the file, if you will. And then it's going to return it back to Lightroom. I'll show you what happens when we get back into Lightroom, but essentially what happens is DxO creates a collection inside of Lightroom, which is fine. It's basically just bringing it back and storing it there. We can delete that in Lightroom without any kind of ramifications. So it's no big deal, but it's just something to be aware of. Okay, so we're going to process this image and we're going to send it back into Lightroom Classic. It will take just a few seconds here as it goes through the processing. You can see it does give you a time of expected, and it's saying 1 minute. I get this a lot. However, it's never taken the full amount of time. It's usually much quicker. We may be looking at a little slower processing time because we are running the screen recording software, and that does tend to lag things down a little bit. And as you can see, it's really picking up speed here, and we're almost done, and we'll be returning back to Lightroom in a second. It will give us a little noise to let us know that it's back, and there we go. Okay. So here's what I'm talking about. When we come into Lightroom, you can see it over here in the collection. This is a collection now, okay? So I have a collections. This is basically just a place to store all of the different species that I've photographed, right? So I can break them down by a specific bird type, by a specific animal type, and if I need to reference that later, I can go to one of these collections and just look through it. So it's just something that I like to do. You can create collections for anything. If you were doing portraits, you could make one for headshots. If you're shooting weddings, you could do one for, you could make collections for the different parts of a wedding day if you wanted, right? Getting ready, ceremony, reception, all of those good things. So you can make collections for whatever you want to do. It's outside of the actual Lightroom catalog, but it's tied to it. So basically what happens is we are now in this collection and we need to get back to our Lightroom catalog. So in order to do that, we're in the develop module right now, which is where we edit. We have to go to the library module. And if I scroll up a little bit, you will see here's my Lightroom catalog, right? These are my folders. Here's my Lightroom catalog, and we want my wildlife catalog. So it's very quick, very simple. Obviously, this is being dragged out because I'm trying to explain it as we go. So we were here in the DxO collection. We needed to get back to the catalog, so we needed to go to library to get back to the catalog system. I click on wildlife. Now I can go back to develop, and you can see here are our two folders, our two pictures. 5003 was our original. And if we click on this and look at the top, we see it's got the ARW, the Sony RAW file format. If we click on the one to the right of it, you can see it's got the Deep Prime XD2S.dng, right? That was the noise reduction software that we did by DxO. So that's how we know. So what I'll do, and I've showed you this before, is I'll just X out the original just so I know, hey, that's not the file that we're going to be working on. Now, I just want to show you quickly that this is true here. If I come over here, we got the DxO PureRAW under the collections. I'm just going to highlight that, right click it, and then I'm going to come down here and I'm going to delete, and that's just going to delete that. Anyway, we are back to picture 5003. 5004 is the one that we want to be looking at. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to crop both images here. Just give it a rough crop. Just make them a little bit smaller for right now. And I'm just going to copy this, and I'm just going to take check none. We're just going to crop it and copy that. And then we can apply the crop to this. Okay, so what I want to do here is I want to go into the library mode where we can compare photos. Okay, so I'm going to highlight both of these photos. I'm going to hit the letter C, and then we're going to compare these. And we're going to see the one with the noise and the one without the noise. So if we zoom in, right, and we can take a look at the noise and the detail. So hopefully you can see all the noise going on around here. And I can zoom it in a little bit more. Let's go even a little closer. Okay, there we go. That should be a little bit more prevalent for you. I just want to make sure we pick it up in the video. Look at the noise going on here, right? And look at the noise here. It is amazingly, it is cleaned up. So we are going to go back to 200%. And I want you to take a look now too at the detail, right? Looks really, really good with the DxO. So that is all that we need to do for the DxO portion of it, right? So now what we would do is we would just take this photo that we came back with and we would go through our editing process. So very, very simple. It's very quick. When you go, the nice thing about DxO is that when you do all those settings along the right-hand side, and you should always just double check when you're editing a photo, but what it does is it stores whatever settings that you had in there on the last photo you edited. So when we go in, the thing that we would want to check, right, is that lens correction. I told you I typically like to use soft, but I went one stronger and used standard. So when we do the next photo, right, if it's a different photo that we don't need the standard lens correction applied, we want to go back to our normal soft lens correction, we would just have to remember to change that back because DxO is still going to be set to the standard because that's the last one we used. So just remember that. It will keep the settings, but if you've changed your settings to deal with a specific image issue, you will need to change them when you go back. Those are important things to take a look at. Now, what I want to do is I want to take a look at some images that were processed. I did this both the same. I took raw images, I ran them through the DxO noise reduction and lens correction and sharpening process. Then I took that same image and I ran it through the Topaz Photo AI sharpening and lens sharpening system, okay? So both images went through each program. And then I applied the same Lightroom edits to both photos because I want that to be exactly even. I want to be able to compare the detail, the colors, all of those things. Let's take a look. I found some interesting results. So I'm going to open up, I got a DX folder and a Topaz Photo AI. This is the first one that I want to look at. Now this is the one, this is a belted kingfisher, another one that was taken in, in the Sony A1 and processed in DxO. And this one is also processed in the Sony A1. And this one was processed on the right in Topaz AI. And we can see right up here, we got the names Topaz and DxO. Let's zoom in a little bit on these two images. This is what I find to be pretty interesting here I'm just going to widen that out a little bit, is that if I look like through this area of the bird especially, right? And I compare that to over here, the DxO one is giving me more detail. Can you see that? There is more detail in those feathers. Look at this right here, and I'm going to go over to the Topaz one here in a second. This is just a little bit smoother. Those feathers have a little bit of smoothness to them, and some of the detail didn't get brought back in the sharpening. So for me, that's kind of a big deal. I think that's important. And if I kind of look at this, like the feathers on the head, I feel like I see a little bit more detail in like these little chunky feathers around the top of the head, as opposed to over here where, I feel like it just has, when it reduced the noise, it's smoothened, it made it smoother, and it didn't bring back all of the detail or bring back enough detail. The other thing that I kind of notice with these photos, I kind of want to bring this out a little bit if I can. Okay, so if I look at this log over here, there's a little bit of a green hue, but if I come over here, and I don't know if you can pick this up on the actual image. I'm a little zoomed in too much here. Okay, so there is like green moss going on right here, and hopefully you can see this in the video. Hopefully that's not being lost here in that translation, but there is like little green moss that's growing in between the bark on these limbs. And again, the same thing is happening over here because obviously it's the same tree limb, but here it creates more of a green like hue. You really can't see the moss chunks like you can over here. Like here's a moss chunk, here's a moss chunk, right? There's a little bit of green hue here, more moss chunks. That is being lost over here in the Topaz photo. So I find that kind of interesting because there's a difference in detail. There's a difference in detail, and if you look, I'm going to just kind of split the screen here again with these. If you look, there's a difference in the colors, and you can see that with these background colors. So the DxO photo looks to me to have colors that are a little bit more vibrant, a little bit more rich, right? These greens have a little bit more pop to them. Where over here, this is a little bit more muted. The background feels a little bit more fallish or a little bit more brownish, whereas this one doesn't feel so much like that. So I do like that too. That kind of suits my preference when it comes to the colors. All right, let's take a look at another image. So this is another belted kingfisher. And I want to look at this one too, because I think this shows, again, there's a loss of detail with Topaz, or maybe it's just that DxO is doing a better job of retaining the detail. But either way, I see more detail in the image on the left with DxO. And I see it through these feathers again. And so I find that pretty interesting. I also see it through the eye of the bird. There's just more detail overall to me between these two images. And if I zoom back out, let's take a look at those background colors. I mean, this is pretty dramatic here, even more so than the first image, right? This first one on the left here, look at how much green is popping through in those in the foliage that's in the background, right? That's blurred out. But if we go over here, this is more brownish, a lot more brownish over here, and those greens just aren't popping out in the same way. Now, yeah, we could make the argument that sure, right? You could bring this photo back from Topaz and you could go through a process of giving more boost to the colors in Lightroom. There might be a breaking point there, right? Where maybe you're pushing the colors too much and it maybe starts to break down on you and look a little bad. That's something you'd have to work on and figure out, right? How much can you push and pull that photo before it starts to break down? But even if you could, I think the point here for me is, why do you want to work so hard to get that same color vibrance, right? Unless you prefer that more muted look. But again, you could then go to the DxO and you could just kind of mute the colors a little bit. And I think you'd probably find that muting the colors would be a little bit of an easier process than it would making the colors, really pushing those colors to make them more vibrant. It'd be a little bit easier to mute them out. So I think we're seeing, again, more detail and more color vibrance coming from the DxO image correction here, the noise reduction. Here's the last one that I want to take a look at. This one, I think, does a good job too of showing how DxO does a good job. Just waiting for this photo to open. Thank you so much for showing up today. So this is just a really good one. Let's zoom in and let's look at this bird, right? Because this bird's eye is very colorful until we look at it with Topaz, right? It's just not the same here. It's just missing some of that vibrance that we're looking for. That's DxO, and that is Topaz, and that is far less orange or red. This bird's eye changes based on the light reflecting in it. It can look a little orangey or a little red, but obviously this is the exact same photo, just processed between two different programs. The colors coming from the one on the left to me are better. The head, right? It's got more vibrant color compared to the one on the right. Not so much in this one, but I did notice in other photos that I edited, these legs, when they went through DxO, came out to be a little bit more like they were in real life. They were a little bit more yellow, whereas here, I think you can still see it even a little bit, even around this top part. That's more yellow than it is over here. This is a little bit more muted out. So those are just some examples, guys, of photos that were run through both programs. What do you think? Have you tried Topaz yet? Have you tried DxO PureRAW 4? Both of them come with free trials. The PureRAW 4 comes with a 14-day free trial, and I believe Topaz, I think you can use it pretty much indefinitely for free. It's just that you won't be able to, download anything. I think you'll have issues with that. Obviously, there are protections in place, but I think that's really interesting when we take a look at these noise reduction software. They have come a long, long way, but I do think DxO is doing a better job than Topaz, and that is where I am shifting to. So that has now become kind of my new workflow. And, you'll find I'm always tinkering with this type of stuff because, I want the best of the best, right, to get the best images possible. But I also like to marry the quality with the time requirements too. All right. I do believe in working smarter rather than harder, but I still want to retain that quality. So I'm hoping DxO, I hope they fix DxO 8 in the sense of they start adding some AI masks. I know they've been very reluctant to go down that road because so many editing software have done that, and this is kind of how they separate themselves, right? They have a very specific customer. I would love to be their customer because I do love how their program edits images. I like how it assesses things. I like their algorithms. It all works wonderfully, but the AI masking for me is kind of big because it's a little bit easier in some of these other programs, which speeds up the editing process. And that is an important factor too. All right, guys, what do you think about this video today? Which one are you going to try? Are you going to try either one? Have you tried both of them? And what were your results? What did you think? If you found this video helpful, if you like it, please be sure to consider subscribing to the channel. And thank you so much for stopping by. This was a little bit longer this week. Thanks for spending your time with me. I truly appreciate you hanging in there. And I look forward to seeing everyone in the next video. Until then, take care.